Our next speaker, her name is Patricia Ramlal, and she's just begun a new job as the research manager for the Ecosystem Research Section for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. She started in January of this year. She is a research scientist with a group studying the Beaufort Sea. In particular, she studies the chemistry of the water and the sediment, as well as the smaller organisms that make up the lower part of the food chain. Her experience as a researcher has led her to work in many locations from the Canadian Arctic to the Great Lakes of Africa. Ladies, Patricia Ramlal.
Thank you very much. I have to tell Sergeant Stokes it's not any easier coming in the middle as it is coming at the beginning. So I had a very interesting journey, as you can probably guess by the places I've gotten to work. I started off going into science as a student at the University of Manitoba. I grew up in Winnipeg, and I was originally going to go to medical school, and I didn't because I was a very bad waitress. And because I was a bad waitress, I got a job at the Freshwater Institute in their environmental chemistry lab and fell in love with doing environmental science. So I changed my career path to look at environmental microbiology and ended up doing a master's degree working at the Experimental Lakes area, which is a research station just outside of Kenora. Some of you might have heard about it. You might have heard of Dr. Schindler in the news recently talking about some of the issues on Lake Winnipeg. He was the first research manager at the Experimental Lakes area, and we try to continue on his work to this day. So now I have to go back to my glasses. So I've had opportunities to work on as many diverse issues as acid rain, mercury pollution, the effects of flooding when they put in reservoirs. That sounds exciting, but what that meant was I had a lot of different jobs. Work sometimes in the environmental field means you have to take short contracts and do short-term work. So I did that for about 15 years. And then there was a big change in the government. There was a big shakeup, and they came to me one day and said, "We don't think we're going to be able to renew your contract at the end of the month," which meant I had no job. And a couple of days later, somebody came up to me in the hallway and said, "Well, I know you don't have a job here, but there's this job in Uganda that we'd like you to consider." And I said, "Oh." And this happened to be around 1994 when all the terrible things were happening in Rwanda. So it was a very scary place for me to go. And I said, "Well, I'll go if I can try the job out for a little while, for 3 weeks, and see if it fits me and I fit it, and then I'll let you know." So I went to Lake Victoria in Uganda. The romantic spot at the source of the Nile River was where my house was. And I fell in love with Africa and worked there for 2 years as a project manager for the University of Michigan, because there were no jobs in Canada, apparently, for my skill set. And I loved it. I loved working in Africa. I loved doing the research that we were doing on the lakes because it was really important. We were looking at problems in lakes that affected millions of people. So it made me feel very worthwhile with the jobs that I was doing. So I finished working in Africa, and I spent a year working at the University of Michigan and thought, I want to do my own projects. I want to be in charge. So I went back to school at the ripe old age of 39 to do a PhD. There were some good points about going back to school when you're 39. You don't have quite the same social pressures as you do when you're 20. But there's also, you're old. And I have to say, one of my most favorite, I was able to get scholarships to go back to school, but my most favorite scholarship was for being an old woman. So just so you know, it's never too late to go back to school. So eventually, I finished my PhD. Actually, it took about 4 years. And in the wisdom of the Canadian government, they hired somebody who has a specialty in African lakes to work in the Arctic Ocean. So I ended up working in the Beaufort Sea, doing wonderful work with a group of scientists from all across Canada and from Europe, working on how the Beaufort Sea works, how it functions, because you know climate change is a big issue and it's a huge issue in the Arctic. Everyone who lives there will ask you very detailed questions about what's going on, and you better have some answers. So that was a challenge for me, and I'm still working on that project, but as Chrissy said at the beginning, I'm now working back in freshwater lakes, and the research station that I talked about doing my master's on, I'm now in charge of it. So it's kind of fun for me to now be the boss of all the people I used to work for and didn't hire me back in 1994. So they asked me to give my definition of success, and there are a lot of wonderful things. I don't have children. I do have a cat who's very, very spoiled, but that doesn't count. But for me, as a scientist, my biggest rewards are providing value for the dollars that Canadians give us to do research, to be able to answer the questions that people have and give them really unbiased information so people can make the best decisions that they need to make the choices that they have to make. And now my role is to help others do that kind of research on their own and provide that expertise to them. So thank you.